Born on March 7, 1904, Reinhard Heydrich remains etched in history as among the most dreaded and ruthless SS commanders within Nazi Germany. His bond with Adolf Hitler proved intricate, characterized by ambition, devotion, and above all, sheer terror. From his ascent through the Nazi hierarchy, Heydrich distinguished himself through his capacity to execute merciless policies and his proximity to the regime's innermost power circles, ultimately positioning him as a potential heir to Hitler's throne. He enlisted in the SS during 1931 under Heinrich Himmler's command, who swiftly recognized his aptitude for organization and suppression. 3 years following, Heydrich assumed leadership of the Gestapo, where he supervised the elimination of political adversaries and the strengthening of SS authority. His involvement in establishing the SS intelligence apparatus positioned him as a central figure within the Third Reich's security framework. As World War II unfolded, Heydrich ascended to director of the Reich Main Security Office, where he assumed a pivotal role in executing the final solution to the Jewish question, a scheme that culminated in the extermination of millions. The relationship binding Hitler and Heydrich represented one of reciprocal respect and interdependence. Hitler required individuals like Heydrich to realize his Third Reich vision, while Heydrich, conversely, profited from his closeness to the Führer. Heydrich, the calculating and frigid individual, maintained an almost parasitic relationship with Hitler. It was commonly stated that Hitler perceived in him a reflection of himself, someone he could implicitly trust to execute the most horrifying task without the slightest hesitation or guilt. Many also regarded him as Hitler's potential successor due to his skill in managing the regime's complex bureaucracy and his readiness to implement the most radical policies. Hitler, who prized loyalty and capability, was attracted to Heydrich's image as a resolute and unwavering leader. It was frequently remarked that Heydrich possessed a sharp intellect and extraordinary organizational and planning abilities, distinguishing him among his peers. Many feared that had he survived longer, Heydrich might have eventually contested Hitler's own supremacy. Particularly Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler harbored distrust toward Reinhard Heydrich for reasons entangled with power struggles and personal aspirations. This ambition created tension with the regime's other two principal leaders, who viewed Heydrich as a potential competitor. Göring, serving as aviation minister and Gestapo founder, retained substantial control over the secret police. Although he initially supported Heydrich, his expanding influence and closeness to Himmler began causing concern. Göring worried that Heydrich might exploit his position to undermine his authority, particularly within a context where Nazi leadership was marked by internal power struggles. For his part, Himmler, despite being Heydrich's close collaborator, also experienced tensions. He needed Heydrich to implement his SS expansion plans, yet simultaneously Heydrich's autonomous capabilities and personal ambition generated mistrust. Himmler understood that Heydrich could be perceived as a threat to his own position as SS chief, leading him to maintain a relationship of respect yet caution toward him. In September 1941, Hitler appointed Heydrich as acting Reich protector for both Bohemia and Moravia, a position granting him extensive authority to suppress resistance within Czech territory. Naturally, his administration relied on fear and violence, cementing his reputation as the Butcher of Prague. By mid-1942, Heydrich fell victim to an assassination attempt in Prague, where he sustained grave injuries. Although Hitler lamented Heydrich's misfortune and his habit of traveling in open vehicles, his death several days later created a vacuum within the Third Reich's power structure. The Führer himself, at his collaborator's funeral, described him as one of the finest National Socialists, one of the staunchest defenders of the German Reich concept, and one of the greatest enemies of all Reich adversaries. That same day, Hitler bestowed upon him the German Order, the regime's highest honor. The repression apparatus, how Heydrich unified the Gestapo and criminal police. Reinhard Heydrich became the architect of Nazi terror through unifying the Gestapo and criminal police. Consolidating these law enforcement agencies into a single organization under his command represented a crucial strategic maneuver that significantly enhanced the regime's internal repression capabilities. Everything commenced in January 1933 when Adolf Hitler seized power, and the Nazis began establishing a police state. In April of that year, Heinrich Himmler was named head of the Bavarian political police and, with his limitless ambition, was placed in charge of the Prussian Gestapo by 1934. Initially, the Gestapo concentrated on crushing political dissent, targeting communists, socialists, and other perceived state enemies. On June 17, 1936, a date marked with cynicism in history, Himmler was appointed chief of German police. Under his leadership, police forces were restructured into two divisions, the Ordnungspolizei and the Sicherheitspolizei. The latter, the crown jewel, integrated the Gestapo and criminal police. Heydrich was designated head of the newly formed Sicherheitspolizei. With World War II's outbreak in September 1939, Heydrich's authority only expanded further. He was appointed head of the Reich Main Security Office, the Reich Sicherheitshauptamt, which encompassed the Sicherheitspolizei, the Sicherheitsdienst, and other security agencies. This role placed Heydrich at the center of Nazi security operations, enabling him to coordinate efforts against both internal and external enemies. Heydrich envisioned the Reich Sicherheitshauptamt as a combative administration capable of rapidly adapting to changing circumstances and executing its policies with brutal efficiency. The centralization of power under the Reich Sicherheitshauptamt allowed for a unified command structure that facilitated the coordination of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and repression operations across Nazi-occupied Europe. Heydrich personally oversaw a vast network of informants and agents, utilizing the SD for intelligence gathering, while the Gestapo handled law enforcement. The criminal police under his command became increasingly involved in political repression. The organization relied heavily on surveillance and intelligence. The SD maintained extensive files on individuals, monitoring public opinion and dissent. This intelligence network allowed the Nazis to preemptively strike against potential threats. House searches, interrogations, and arrests became commonplace, often based on mere suspicion or denunciations. Terror served as the primary tool for maintaining control. The Gestapo and Sicherheitspolizei operated with near-total impunity, detaining individuals without trial under the pretext of protective custody. This practice allowed them to arrest anyone deemed a threat, including political dissidents, Jews, and other marginalized groups. Gestapo interrogation methods were brutal and included torture. Detainees often faced physical abuse to extract confessions or information. Psychological terror was also prevalent, as people feared not only for their own safety but also for that of their families. To achieve his objectives, Heydrich surrounded himself with a select group of trusted men to carry out the policies of terror and repression. These individuals were key in unifying the Gestapo and criminal police, as well as in implementing the Holocaust. One of them was Werner Best, who served as Heydrich's deputy and later as head of the political police department of the Reich Sicherheitshauptamt. His legal training allowed him to give an air of legitimacy to the Gestapo's extrajudicial actions, always with a sardonic smile. But Best not only formulated policies on the treatment of Jews and political dissidents, he also administered occupied territories. Another example is Walter Schellenberg, the mastermind behind the organization and administration of the Gestapo, leading the second department of the Reich Sicherheitshauptamt. His skill in police administration helped develop effective operational methods, particularly in intelligence and surveillance. Schellenberg was as loyal to Heydrich as a dog to its master. Franz Six, on the other hand, co-led the Einsatzgruppen, those charming mobile extermination units responsible for mass shootings in occupied territories. Six was the perfect ideologue, always willing to carry out Heydrich's orders without question, exterminating Jews and any other undesirable groups with an efficiency that was almost admirable. Lena Heydrich, the hidden face of the Nazi Aryan family, born as Lena Matilda von Osten on June 14, 1911, this woman would become the wife of Reinhard Heydrich in December 1931. This union marked the beginning of a family that would embody the ideals of the Aryan family devoutly promoted by the Nazi regime. Lena, the daughter of a minor German aristocrat, joined the Nazi Party in 1929, influenced by her brother Hans, an active member of the Sturmabteilung. The Heydrich family began their life together in Hamburg, where Lena encouraged Reinhard after he was dismissed from the Navy due to a scandal to pursue a career in the SS. This decision proved crucial as Reinhard quickly rose through the ranks and became the head of the SS intelligence service, the Sicherheitsdienst. As Reinhard's career flourished, Lena assumed the role of a traditional housewife, managing the household and caring for their children. The demands of Reinhard's work often kept him away from home, leading to tensions in their marriage. Despite the difficulties, they had 4 children in total, each of whom played a role in the family narrative during and after the war. Their first child, Klaus, was born in 1933, followed by Haider a year later. Despite the strict upbringing and expectation of greatness, Klaus barely had the chance to be a child. The tragic death of the eldest in a traffic accident at just 10 years old deeply affected Lena, who reacted with intense grief and anger, demanding justice against the driver involved. Haider, on the other hand, became the recipient of all the frustrated expectations. He grew up in an atmosphere of paranoia where every move was watched and every mistake punished. Silke, born in 1939, was the couple's first daughter and became a source of pride for Reinhard, who was known for spoiling her. Marte, the youngest, was born just weeks before Reinhard's death in 1942. The children were raised in an environment steeped in Nazi ideology, and Lena instilled in them the values of Aryan superiority and loyalty to the regime. But the noble life they presented to the outside world was a facade. Behind closed doors, a private hell was brewing. It was often said that Lena, with her rigidity and fervor, was even more fanatical than her husband, instilling in her children not only Nazi values, but also an absolute disdain for any form of weakness or dissent. Lena's role as a mother was intertwined with her husband's political ambitions. She managed the household at their estate in Jungfernbrechen, where the family lived until the end of World War II. Reports indicate that she maintained a strict home and oversaw forced labor, a practice aligned with the Nazi regime's exploitation of conquered peoples. Witnesses echoed how she physically abused these workers. The family's lifestyle was characterized by the privileges granted by Reinhard's position. They enjoyed a comfortable home life, including leisure activities like horseback riding and croquet, reflecting the bourgeois ideals of the time. Lena's efforts to uphold the image of an ideal Aryan family were evident in her public appearances and how she presented her children. She often emphasized their Aryan lineage and the importance of their roles in the Nazi state. But Lena faced the challenges of widowhood in a rapidly changing political landscape. She remained in Czechoslovakia for a time, managing the estate and her children under the watchful eye of Heinrich Himmler, who took on a protective role over her during the war. As the Heydrich family fled the advancing Soviet forces, they eventually returned to Fehmarn, where Lena attempted to rebuild their lives. In the following years, Lena sought to defend her husband's legacy and published a memoir in 1976 titled Living with a War Criminal. In this work, she portrayed Reinhard as a devoted family man, a victim of circumstances rather than a perpetrator of horrors, distancing him from the atrocities committed during the Holocaust. Her narrative aimed to uphold the ideals of the Aryan family, despite the overwhelming evidence of her husband's role in the crimes of the Nazi regime. Einsatzgruppen, the history of Nazi mobile death units. The Butcher of Prague played a crucial role in the creation and leadership of the Einsatzgruppen during World War II. These mobile killing units, composed primarily of SS and police personnel, were responsible for the systematic elimination of civilians deemed enemies of Nazi Germany in the occupied territories of the Soviet Union. The Einsatzgruppen originated from the ad hoc Einsatzkommandos, created by Heydrich to secure government buildings and documents following the Anschluss in Austria in March 1938. Initially part of the Sicherheitspolizei, 2 Einsatzgruppen units were stationed in the Sudetenland in October of that year. When military action proved unnecessary due to the Munich Agreement, the Einsatzgruppen were tasked with confiscating government and police documents, securing government buildings, interrogating high-ranking public officials, and arresting up to 10,000 Czech communists and German citizens. From September 1939, the Reich Main Security Office had overall command of the Einsatzgruppen as part of the campaign to eliminate so-called undesirable elements from the German population. From September to December of that year, the Einsatzgruppen participated in Action T4, the Nazi euthanasia program. In response to Adolf Hitler's plan to invade Poland on September 1st, Heydrich organized 4 Einsatzgruppen to accompany the German army. These groups were responsible for the intelligence action in Operation Tannenberg, in which thousands of Poles, including intellectuals, priests, teachers, and members of the nobility, were murdered. It is said that the victims were shot while attempting to escape. Nearly a year and a half later, Heydrich verbally transmitted the order to kill Soviet Jews to the security police NCO school in Prech, where the commanders of the reorganized Einsatzgruppen were being trained for Operation Barbarossa. In the spring of 1941, Heydrich and the first quartermaster of the Wehrmacht, General Eduard Wagner, successfully completed negotiations for cooperation between the Einsatzgruppen and the German army to allow for the implementation of special tasks. Following the Heydrich-Wagner Agreement on April 28th of that year, Field Marshal Walter von Brauchitsch ordered that when Operation Barbarossa began, all German army commanders must immediately identify and register all Jews in the occupied areas of the Soviet Union and fully cooperate with the Einsatzgruppen. In line with Germany's attempt to wage an ideological war of annihilation in the Soviet Union, Heydrich, as head of the Reich Main Security Office, ordered the Einsatzgruppen commanders to systematically kill civilians considered enemies of Nazi Germany. The targets of these killings included Jewish civilians, Romani gypsies, Soviet Communist Party officials, and anyone else deemed politically or racially dangerous. As the German army advanced into Soviet territory, the Einsatzgruppen followed the troops and carried out mass killings. Initially, the Einsatzgruppen personnel, assisted by locally recruited police auxiliaries and other SS and German police units, primarily shot Jewish men. By the end of July 1941, following the deployment of more SS and police personnel in occupied Soviet territory, these units, including the Einsatzgruppen, began annihilating entire Jewish communities, indiscriminately killing men, women, and children. 4 battalion-sized Einsatzgruppen and several police battalions were deployed throughout the Soviet Union. Einsatzgruppe A advanced from East Prussia through Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia towards Leningrad. They massacred Jews in Kovno, Riga, and Vilna. Einsatzgruppe B moved from Warsaw in occupied Poland towards Belarus and Smolensk. Einsatzgruppe C advanced from Krakow through western Ukraine to Kiev. Einsatzgruppe D moved from Romania through Odessa to the Caucasus. In total, the Einsatzgruppen and other police units murdered approximately 1 million Jews in the Soviet Union during those 2 years. Beginning in 1941, Heydrich played a crucial role in the creation, organization, and leadership of these mass murder units, significantly contributing to the Holocaust. Under his direction, the Einsatzgruppen not only became efficient killing machines, but also symbolized the most extreme application of Nazi ideology. Heydrich left nothing to chance. Every detail of the Einsatzgruppen's operations was meticulously planned and executed with lethal precision. Detailed reports sent to Berlin recorded the number of dead, the locations of massacres, and the reasons behind each killing. The men under his command were not mere soldiers. They were carefully selected to be instruments of his will, each an extension of his hatred and desire for racial purity. These men, hardened and ruthless, needed no incentives. Their blind faith in Nazi ideology and unquestioning obedience to Heydrich were enough. The operations of the Einsatzgruppen had a devastating impact on Jewish communities in the Soviet Union. Village after village, populations were annihilated, and the few survivors faced a life of constant fear and persecution. The techniques varied, but the result was always the same: the systematic elimination of large groups of people. Mass shootings were the most common tactic, but more efficient methods were also employed, such as the use of gas vans where victims were asphyxiated while being transported to remote locations for burial. Mass graves where thousands of men, women, and children lay buried became silent witnesses to the brutal reality of the war. Heydrich personally oversaw the operations, ensuring that there were no deviations from his ultimate goal: the complete elimination of any resistance to Nazi domination. Destruction. Under the moon. How a telegram unleashed Kristallnacht. On the night of November 9, 1938, a degrading spectacle unfolded beneath the moonlight, orchestrated by the highest officials of the Nazi Party. Reinhard Heydrich himself, head of the security police, strutted in his role as a sinister puppeteer, ensuring everything proceeded according to plan. The spark that ignited the flame was the assassination of Ernst vom Rath, a German embassy official in Paris, by a young Polish Jew, Herschel Greenspan. Poor Greenspan, desperate over the recent expulsion of his family and thousands of other Polish Jews from Germany, decided to take drastic action. He confronted vom Rath and shot him. Faced with this situation, Joseph Goebbels, the master of propaganda, wasted no time in stoking the flames of hatred with a speech that was more venom than words. With incendiary rhetoric, he set the stage for what was to come: The SA and the Hitler Youth, always ready for a good vandalism session, sprang into action. Dressed in civilian clothes, of course, to make it appear as a spontaneous, popular uprising. At 1:20 in the morning on November 10th, Heydrich sent a telegram. The documents and instructions were clear. It stated, among other things, only actions that do not endanger German lives or property may be carried out. For example, burning synagogues, only when there is no risk of fire spreading to surrounding areas. Jewish stores and residences may be destroyed, but not looted. The police have instructions to monitor the enforcement of this order and to arrest looters. In commercial streets, special care must be taken to ensure that non-Jewish businesses are fully protected against damage. Foreign citizens, even if they are Jews, are not to be molested. As soon as the course of events tonight permits, the police officers assigned to this task are to arrest as many Jews, especially wealthy Jews, as can be accommodated in the existing detention facilities. For now, only healthy male Jews who are not too old are to be arrested. Immediately after the arrests, contact must be made with the appropriate concentration camp to place the Jews in the camps as quickly as possible. Special care must be taken to ensure that Jews arrested based on this instruction are not mistreated. Signed, Reinhard Heydrich, SS Major General, Chief of Nazi Security Police. Everything had to be done with the precision of a Swiss watch, German efficiency in the service of hatred. And of course, they had to retrieve the archives of Jewish communities before destroying the synagogues, because even in the midst of chaos, bureaucracy must continue. The streets filled with shattered glass, giving rise to the name Night of Broken Glass. About 1,400 temples burned that night, while Jewish businesses were torn apart with an efficiency that would have made a Viking raider blush. But it wasn't just about breaking things. Jews were beaten, humiliated, and killed. Around 30,000 were arrested and sent to concentration camps. The Nazi regime attempted to sell Kristallnacht as a spontaneous reaction of the German people to von Rath's death, as if millions of people had woken up that morning thinking, today is a good day for a pogrom. But the planning and coordination behind the attacks proved otherwise. Such a meticulous operation could only have been orchestrated by a government that had declared the Jewish people its enemy. The government imposed a fine of 1 billion marks on the Jewish community to cover the damages caused. Yes, the very Jews who had been attacked and whose properties had been destroyed now had to pay for it. This event marked a shift in the Nazi regime's policy. Until then, anti-Semitic measures had been more subtle, focusing on economic and social exclusion. But Kristallnacht was a leap toward physical violence and open persecution. The Jewish community was devastated. Many desperately sought ways to escape Germany, though the world's doors were quickly closing in their faces. Refugee camps filled up, but there was not enough space for everyone. The world watched, some in horror, others with indifference, and a few with silent approval. The pogrom not only devastated Jewish communities, but also impacted international perception of the Nazi regime. Although there were limited condemnations from foreign governments, the brutality of Kristallnacht led some to reconsider their relationship with Germany. However, the lack of a significant response from Western powers was a green light for the Nazis to continue with their anti-Semitic policies. The passivity of many German citizens was also noted. Many saw the attacks as a manifestation of popular sentiment. From international cooperation to Nazi terror, Interpol turned into a tool of the Third Reich. Since its founding in 1923, the International Criminal Police Commission, known as the ICPC, was established with the noble goal of facilitating international police cooperation, primarily focusing on combating transnational crime. However, with the rise of Nazi Germany, the mission and operations of the organization changed drastically. Following the Anschluss in 1938, when Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany, the ICPC came under direct Nazi control. The organization's headquarters were moved to Berlin, and its leadership was replaced by high-ranking SS officers. Reinhard Heydrich was appointed president of the organization on August 24, 1940. Before him, the ICPC was also led by a member of the National Socialist Party, Otto Steinhäusl. Under this leadership, the organization became a tool of Nazi propaganda and repression, focusing on the regime's priorities rather than its original mission of international police cooperation. With Heydrich at the helm, the ICPC was integrated into the broader framework of the Reich Main Security Office, Reich Sicherheitshauptamt, which he also headed. This integration allowed for a more centralized and efficient command structure, where the ICPC could coordinate closely with the Gestapo and other Nazi security agencies. Heydrich's management transformed the ICPC into an organization that supported the objectives of the Nazi regime. The focus shifted from combating international crime to identifying and persecuting political opponents, Jews, and other marginalized groups. As a result, the exchange of information about these groups between member states was facilitated, effectively turning the ICPC into an instrument of state-sponsored terror on an international scale. First and foremost, international collaboration involved the exchange of information. The ICPC became a conduit for sharing intelligence on political dissidents and criminal activities that aligned with Nazi interests. The organization provided member states with information on individuals deemed undesirable by the regime. Secondly, the ICPC coordinated arrests. It worked with the Gestapo and other police forces to carry out arrests and deportations. This collaboration was particularly evident in the systematic roundup of Jews across Europe, where the organization's databases were used to identify and locate targets. Most importantly for the Third Reich's objectives were the international operations fully aligned with Hitler's administration. The ICPC facilitated the extradition of political dissidents and criminals to Nazi Germany. This included the arrest of individuals in neutral countries who opposed the regime, often leading to their deportation and persecution. During the war, the ICPC's activities stagnated as many member countries withdrew their support due to the organization's alignment with Nazi policies. The focus on political repression overshadowed its original objectives of international cooperation against crime. By the end of the war, the ICPC had become largely ineffective as a law enforcement body, serving primarily the interests of the Nazi regime. The leadership of Heydrich and the involvement of high-ranking SS officials like Arthur Nebe and Ernst Kaltenbrunner, who succeeded him in leading the multilateral space, further cemented the organization's role within the Nazi security apparatus. These individuals were responsible for implementing policies that facilitated the Holocaust and the persecution of political opponents. Their control over the ICPC ensured that it operated as an extension of the SS, rather than as an independent police organization. After World War II, the ICPC was re-established as the International Criminal Police Organization Interpol, with a renewed focus on international cooperation and crime fighting. However, the legacy of its activity during the war continued to affect its reputation and operations for several years. Invasion of Czechoslovakia, cultural repression, and Nazi terror. The roots of the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia trace back to the Munich Agreement of September 1938, where Britain, France, Germany, and Italy agreed to cede the Sudetenland, a border region of Czechoslovakia with a significant German population, to Nazi Germany. This concession was made under the pretext of avoiding war, but only served to embolden Hitler and weaken Czech defenses. The Sudetenland was officially annexed on October 1, 1938, dismantling Czechoslovakia's border fortifications and leaving the country vulnerable. On March 15, 1939, Hitler violated the Munich Agreement by invading the remaining parts of Czechoslovakia, specifically the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia. The invasion was swift and met little resistance, as the Czech government had already been destabilized by the previous concessions. This territory was considered strategic for the German war effort, and its administration was entrusted to Nazi leaders who implemented policies of repression and Germanization. After the invasion, Hitler declared the establishment of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, with German administration exercising direct control over the region. The Protectorate was established as a puppet state, which seemingly maintained the appearance of local governance. Emil Hácha, the last president of Czechoslovakia, was coerced into signing away the country's independence during a meeting with Hitler in Berlin. He was appointed as the nominal head of state with the title of state president, but his powers were severely limited. The real authority lay in the hands of the Reich Protector, who acted as Hitler's representative. Initially, Konstantin von Neurath served as Reich Protector, but in September 1941 he was replaced by Reinhard Heydrich. Under Heydrich's leadership, the Protectorate became a site of intense repression and persecution, especially against Jews and political dissidents. From the outset of his tenure, Heydrich took drastic measures to eliminate any form of cultural expression that could challenge Nazi ideology. All Czech cultural and sports organizations were banned, and the activities of educational and artistic institutions were suppressed. The goal was to strip the Czech population of their cultural identity and promote a German culture aligned with the values of the Third Reich. Cultural repression included censorship of the press and literature, where any content considered subversive or promoting Czech nationalism was strictly controlled. Libraries were purged and many books were destroyed or banned. This censorship extended to the media, where a narrative glorifying Germany and demonizing the Czechs and other nationalities was imposed. Heydrich's administration was characterized by ruthless methods. Political repression focused on different opposition viewpoints, especially communists and nationalists. The Gestapo under his command conducted extensive surveillance, arrests, and executions of those deemed threats to the Nazi regime. The Jewish population in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was particularly affected by Heydrich's policies. His policies were not limited to physical repression, but also included a systematic effort to strip Jews of their rights and property. Laws were implemented that restricted their participation in economic and social life, leading to the ruin of many Jewish families. In October and November 1941, summary trials in special courts resulted in the death sentences of 342 people, while thousands more were arrested and handed over to the Gestapo. In November of that year, Heydrich ordered the establishment of the Theresienstadt ghetto, which served as a transit camp for Jews being deported to extermination camps. Theresienstadt, under his administration, became a propaganda facade to deceive the world about the true fate of deported Jews. While trains carried thousands to their deaths, the Nazi regime presented Theresienstadt as a model settlement. In 1930, there were approximately 118,000 Jews in the region, but most were deported to extermination camps. Not satisfied with political repression and the persecution of Jews, Heydrich also sought to control the daily lives of the Czechs. He offered economic incentives to Czech workers to encourage their collaboration with the Nazi regime, such as wages equivalent to those of Germans. However, this did not mean an improvement in their living conditions, as most policies were designed to benefit Nazi Germany and its war effort. Repression extended to all spheres of social life. Heydrich left no aspect unsupervised. His administration was obsessed with total control, using both fear and manipulation to maintain the population's subordination. The apparent normality of daily life concealed a machinery of oppression that monitored and punished any deviation from the Nazi line. Despite the oppressive environment, resistance movements emerged in Czechoslovakia. Various groups, including the Communist Party and nationalist organizations, carried out acts of sabotage and subversion. The Terror Decreed. How Heydrich used the night and fog decrees. Heydrich played a crucial role in the implementation of the night and fog decrees, the Nazi policy designed to eliminate anyone who dared to oppose the regime in occupied territories during World War II. The Nazis and their love for decrees. These particular ones, signed by Adolf Hitler in December 1941, granted Heydrich, as head of the Reich Main Security Office, Reich Sicherheitshauptamt, almost unlimited power to deal with resistance. It all began in the summer of 1941, when a large number of German troops decided that the occupation of France was no longer exciting enough and marched off to invade the Soviet Union. This sudden military shift caused an explosion of communist resistance activity across occupied Europe, including, of course, France. Consequently, the brave resistance fighters intensified their efforts, primarily targeting occupation units, and acts of sabotage became the favorite activity of many. German communication lines began to crumble thanks to these daring saboteurs. German counterintelligence redoubled its efforts and captured a large number of resistance members and saboteurs, but this led to more trials by already overloaded military courts. Hitler, seeing the situation, thought that the military justice system was an unnecessary nuisance and too lenient. He decided it was time to stop playing at justice and move to pure and brutal intimidation. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel objected, arguing that it was impractical to sentence all potential resistors to death. He also said that military courts would refuse to cooperate. But in December of that same year, Hitler signed the Night and Fog Decrees, granting Heydrich and the Reich Main Security Office broad powers to handle resistance in the occupied territories. The decree replaced the previous policy of long prison sentences, re-education, and hostage-taking. Now German authorities could abduct those who endangered German security during the night, ensuring that they disappeared without a trace. At this point, for the National Socialist government, arresting and killing people in secret was an act of justice. Under Heydrich's direction, the Reich Main Security Office systematically implemented these decrees. Suspects were arrested in the dead of night, transported to concentration camps, and tortured to extract any information about the resistance. And of course, many prisoners simply disappeared without a trace, Nazi efficiency at its peak. The authorities applied this decree primarily in occupied Western Europe: Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands. Heydrich also ordered that prisoners be transferred to Germany, where they were tried by special courts. These trials, if they could be called that, were mere formalities. Most of the accused were sentenced to death or long prison terms. Those who were not sentenced to death and managed to complete their sentences were sent directly to concentration camps, usually to Gross Rosen and Natzweiler Struthof. There they wore jackets marked with the acronym NN to identify their special status as Nacht und Nebel, night and fog prisoners. The night and fog decrees had a devastating impact on the resistance in the occupied territories. The fear of disappearance and torture dissuaded many from participating in opposition activities. Under Heydrich's command, the Reich Main Security Office also used the decrees to eliminate Jews from the occupied territories. Many Jewish prisoners were deported to extermination camps, where they were, of course, murdered. The implementation of the night and fog decrees did not go unnoticed on the international scene. In 1942, the Dutch government protested the treatment of Dutch prisoners under these decrees. But as expected, the lack of a strong response from the Allied powers only encouraged Heydrich and the Nazi regime to continue with their policies of terror. The bureaucratized Holocaust, how Wannsee formalized genocide. On January 20th, 1942, in a villa by Lake Wannsee in Berlin, a meeting took place that undoubtedly became a devastating event for millions. It was the Wannsee Conference, a palpable display of the murderous bureaucracy that Reinhard Heydrich and his cronies wielded with the precision of a death-dispensing machine. This event was not the genesis of the extermination policy. Rather, it was the formalization of a barbarity already in progress. A macabre ballet of death delegates. Heydrich, with an air of superiority, opened the event. The incongruity of the setting with the agenda at hand was more than evident. The event brought together 15 high-ranking Nazi officials, each with their own calculated cruelty, to coordinate the implementation of the final solution. With a coldness that would make an iceberg seem warmer than the sun, Heydrich, second in command of the SS, delivered a speech that amounted to a recipe for massive annihilation. He asserted that the elimination of the Jews was not only necessary but inevitable, as if he were discussing trimming a garden rather than exterminating an entire race. Since the beginning of the war, and especially after the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Einsatzgruppen had been doing their part to cleanse the occupied territories, fulfilling their role as roving executioners. Reports already spoke of hundreds of thousands of Jews murdered, making the need for a more efficient and structured solution clearer than ever. The war was in full swing, and the Nazi regime needed to consolidate its control over Europe while extending its fantasy of racial purity. During the conference, who would be targeted by the final solution was meticulously discussed. The attendees debated the categories of Jews to be exterminated, establishing criteria for their treatment. Mixed Jewish ancestry and how these individuals would be categorized as undesirables were also discussed. The bureaucracy of genocide was in full operation. The language used was deliberately euphemistic. Jews would not be killed, they would be evacuated to the east, where instead of being used as labor or reformed, they would end up in extermination camps. The methods discussed were even more disturbing. Heydrich mentioned the use of a little-known instrument at the time: gas chambers. This was a technique that had not yet been implemented on a large scale. Among the attendees were key figures like Adolf Eichmann, the master of deportation logistics, Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo, and other high-ranking officials from various agencies. Each received precise instructions on their role in executing the final solution, ensuring that all government departments were perfectly synchronized in this effort of extermination. By bringing these officials together, Heydrich ensured that the final solution was not just a massive act of disorganized brutality, but a meticulously planned and executed operation. The most terrifying aspect of the conference was not the discussion itself, but the complete lack of opposition. The absence of objections demonstrated a general acceptance of the anti Semitic ideology and deep dehumanization. Jews were not seen as human beings, but as obstacles to be removed, with the same indifference one might use to discard old shoes. Once the conference concluded, the plans discussed were implemented. Decisions turned into actions, and thousands of Jews were deported from ghettos across Europe to extermination camps in Poland, such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. The Wannsee Conference formalized large-scale genocide and established an administrative framework so efficient it could have been the pride of any multinational corporation. Reports sent to Berlin recorded in great detail the number of dead, the locations of the massacres, and the reasons behind each killing. These documents also reflected the bureaucratic mentality with which Heydrich approached the solution to the problem of the Reich's enemies. The impact of the Wannsee Conference on Jewish communities across Europe was devastating. Village after village was wiped out, populations eliminated with a swiftness that surpassed any nightmare. The few survivors lived in a state of constant fear and persecution, with the reality of the final solution becoming an omnipresent shadow over their lives. Operation Anthropoid, the death of Heydrich, and Nazi revenge. Reinhard Heydrich, a Nazi who seemed invincible, met his fate on May 27, 1942, in Prague, Czechoslovakia. With the arrival of Jan Kubisch and Josef Gabčík in late 1941, Operation Anthropoid began. They settled clandestinely in Prague. During those first months, they used their time to contact the resistance. They planned the assassination. During their investigation, they discovered that Heydrich moved around the area carelessly. He lived in a large castle and took the same route at the same time every morning. After a few days of study and thanks to the predictability of the Nazis' movements, they realized that a curve in the road, which forced the driver to slow down, was ideal for attempting to kill him. Prague, May 27, 1942. Sunday morning. A mild sun beats down on the asphalt. There is some movement on the streets. Cars pass by, people walk, trams start to fill up. 3 men try to blend in. They are oblivious to the everyday hustle. They are only focused on the arrival of a car. But the car is delayed. This had never happened in the previous months. Had someone betrayed them? Armed with a Sten submachine gun and a modified anti-tank grenade, they waited patiently for the right moment. On the morning of the attack, Heydrich was traveling nonchalantly in his open-top Mercedes 320 Cabriolet, accompanied by his driver, SS Oberscharführer Johannes Klein. The 3 men grew impatient considering aborting the plan. Then, in the distance, they saw the convertible Mercedes-Benz approaching. It was coming fast, but that didn't matter. When it got close to them, it would slow down. A sharp curve would force it to. That's why they chose to position themselves there. The Mercedes was driven by a chauffeur. In the back seat alone sat Reinhard Heydrich, the Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia. His power and megalomania were such that he didn't believe he needed protection. He felt invincible traveling without a guard in an unarmored convertible. But that morning would prove him vulnerable. When the car slowed down to take the curve, one of the men stepped in front of it, brandishing a weapon and aiming at Heydrich. He pulled the trigger, but the gun misfired. The weapon was jammed. It was then that the Nazi drew his weapon, standing up and aiming at his assailant. But as he tried to get out of the car, an explosion stunned him and threw him backward. A grenade missed its target, the back seat, but landed next to the right wheel. The car lifted into the air for less than a second and crashed down heavily. A cloud of smoke obscured what was happening. Everything occurred in those moments indistinctly. There were shouts, the crunching of footsteps on shattered glass, the smell of gunpowder and burning rubber thickening the air. The driver chased one of the attackers. Heydrich also got out of the car with his weapon. He took a few steps, staggered, and fell backward. He was injured. The attackers ran off in search of refuge. They fled, believing the mission had been a great failure. They had seen Heydrich walk out of his car and even start a pursuit. They had missed the chance of a lifetime. The jammed weapon, the nerves, the lack of accuracy in hitting the back seat with the grenade. Not only had they failed to kill him, but with their failure, they had likely prevented others from trying, as security measures would now be heightened. They needed to hide because the reprisals would be immediate and fatal. They would be hunted down along with their families and friends, the resistance would be destroyed, and ordinary citizens would suffer vengeance. but Heydrich collapsed shortly after getting out of the convertible. He was immediately taken to the hospital. However, he refused to be treated by Prague doctors. He had lost faith in the Czechs. He demanded specialists be sent from Berlin. The wounds were not fatal, but they were severe. Shrapnel had lodged in his spleen, some ribs were fractured, and his diaphragm was perforated. But the worst part, what they hadn't accounted for, was a widespread infection that slowly took over. They found long hairs in the wounds, believing they were dealing with a special weapon designed to poison or infect the victim. It took time to determine that they were horsehair used as padding in the luxury car's upholstery. The British could feel doubly proud of the attack. They had funded it and kept the discovery of penicillin a secret. On June 4, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich died in a Prague hospital. 5 days later, his funeral was held in Berlin. It was a state event. All the Nazi leaders were present. The last speaker was Hitler himself, who appeared deeply moved. Simultaneously, in that Nazi-controlled Prague, the atmosphere was not one of mourning, but of vengeance. Raids were conducted house by house. A huge reward was offered to anyone providing information about the culprits. More than 70 people were killed in the first few days as reprisals. The Germans had to walk a fine line. On one hand, they wanted to make the punishment loud and clear, instilling more fear in the population and quenching their thirst for revenge. On the other, they didn't want the atmosphere of well-being and acceptance that had prevailed until then among much of Czech society to evaporate. The radio broadcast a proclamation several times an hour. On May 27, 1942, an attempt was made on Reich Protector Heydrich in Prague. A reward of 10 million crowns has been set for the arrest of the culprits. Anyone who shelters these criminals, provides them with aid, or knows them and does not report them, will be shot along with their entire family. The statement continued, imposing martial law banning all public or private gatherings, and reiterating that anyone who violated these orders would be shot immediately. But the Germans' revenge did not end with those 70 deaths. They wiped out an entire village, Lidis. They killed all its men, women, and children. Nor did they stop there. The next victim was the village of Ležáky. All the men were shot and the women and children sent to concentration camps. In total, in those first weeks, there were more than 1,300 deaths resulting from the attack on Heydrich. The culprits had not yet been found. These murders, this almost chronic vengeance, aimed to instill fear and provoke defections and betrayals. They succeeded. Karl Czerda, who had participated in supporting the operation and knew where those who had carried out the attack were hiding, betrayed them. According to him, he only wanted to stop the massacre to prevent more deaths. Many believe he did it just for the reward. The day he presented himself to the authorities, Czerda didn't have an easy time. He was subjected to intense interrogation. They tortured him, beat him, and threatened him with death. They wanted to be sure he wasn't lying, that he wasn't hiding any information. In the early hours of June 18th, more than 700 SS men surrounded a church on the outskirts of the city. There were shouts, demands for surrender, and some shots fired as a threat. But when the German soldiers tried to enter and capture the Czechs, they were met with a burst of gunfire. It was a terrible and unequal battle, 700 against 7. After 8 hours of combat, 21 Nazi soldiers were dead and many others were seriously injured. Little was known about those inside, only that they were still resisting, taking advantage of the fact that the church was difficult to approach. The attack intensified. Suddenly, the attackers realized their shots were no longer being returned. A long silence followed. The wait lasted more than half an hour until some dared to enter. In the church's central nave, they found 2 lifeless bodies and a third that was bleeding out. They searched but found no one else. It seemed impossible to believe that those 3 had caused so much trouble. It couldn't have been them, until a soldier discovered a crypt and a marble slab that could be moved. As soon as he poked his head through that small opening, a shot embedded itself in his forehead. 4 were still alive and planning to resist. The access was limited, and every soldier who managed to get down was shot. They had to think of another tactic. Someone decided it would be best to blow up the part of the marble covering the crypt to enlarge the access. After the explosion, silence once again fell. But when they tried to descend again, they were repelled. The Germans tried to flood the stronghold but failed to force them out. While they brainstormed new ways to access the hideout, 4 consecutive dry shots were heard from the depths of the crypt. Then there was no more noise for a long time. The Czechs had run out of bullets. They used the last four to commit suicide rather than fall alive into Nazi hands. Karl Czurda collected the reward. It was a small fortune, but he didn't enjoy it for long. In 1946, after the war, he was executed after being found guilty of treason. Almost as if he were a head of state, Reinhard Heydrich received a spectacular ceremony in his honor, as ordered by Adolf Hitler. First, a massive procession was organized in Prague, reaching over 1.5 million people. Before his coffin was transported aboard a train with an SS honor guard accompanying it to the Chancellery in Berlin. Finally, it was placed in a hearse that traveled through the capital streets to the sound of the Siegfried March composed by Richard Wagner before being buried at the Invalidenfriedhof Cemetery. Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most recalcitrant and ferocious Nazis, was the only one of Hitler's top leaders to lose his life in an assassination attempt during World War II. After the war, Heydrich's remains were moved to an unmarked grave, as with the other dead Nazi leaders. The Allies did not want their graves to become places of worship and pilgrimage for surviving Nazi fanatics and those who would emerge over the years.